The entire ballroom erupted in laughter as Tendai stood frozen beneath the crystal lights, still wearing the silk gown her family had forced onto her only minutes earlier. "Look at her face," Nalia sneered loudly, clinking her champagne glass for attention. "Our poor little Tendai thought she deserved a wealthy husband. Instead, father found her the only man beneath her status enough to match her worth." Then the doors opened, and in walked Kabelo, the family's lowly bodyguard, dressed in a plain black suit, his expression unreadable. "Marry him," Jabulani ordered coldly. "Right now, or your grandmother leaves this house tonight." Tendai's breath caught. The guests laughed harder. But strangely, Kabelo did not look embarrassed. He looked like a man watching everyone walk straight into a trap. "Before we go further, tell me honestly, if your own family humiliated you like this in public, would you obey, or walk away from everything? And while you're watching, comment below where you're from and what time it is in your country right now. If you love powerful emotional stories filled with shocking twists and deep life lessons, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next one." Long before the wedding, humiliation, Tendai had already learned what it meant to disappear while standing in plain sight. In the Dube mansion, silence had rules. It could protect the powerful. It could bury the truth. And it could turn one daughter into a shadow while the other was raised like royalty. The house itself was beautiful enough to fool anyone. White stone walls, tall glass window, imported chandeliers, a courtyard full of trimmed palms and blue water. From the outside, it looked like a home where love must have lived. Inside, love had long ago been assigned a ranking. And Tendai was at the bottom. "Why are you still standing there?" Mirembe's voice cut through the breakfast room like a whip. Did the flowers arrange themselves? Did the guests confirm themselves? Or are you waiting for someone to applaud you for breathing? Tendai lowered her eyes. "I already called the florist. They're coming at 10. "Then go check the silverware," Mirembe snapped. "And make sure Nalia's dress is steamed properly this time. Last week you nearly embarrassed her. The lie landed the way it always did, clean, practiced shameless. It had not been Tendai who ruined the silk gown last week. Nalia had spilled foundation on it during one of her tantrums, then cried in front of Jabulani and said Tendai had been careless. Jabulani had not asked questions. He never did when the answer might favor Tendai. He only looked at her the way a man might look at a stain on polished wood. "Do better," he had said. That was all. Across the breakfast table, Nalia smiled without looking up from her phone. She was radiant that morning. Gold bracelets on both wrists. Soft makeup, white robe draped over her shoulders like she had been born to be admired. Everything around her seemed arranged to flatter her, even cruelty. "Tendai is trying," Nalia said sweetly, then sipped her juice. In her own limited way. Mirembe laughed. Jabulani folded his newspaper and stood. "The Maseko family is coming tonight. Nothing must go wrong. Nothing must go wrong." That meant Tendai would not sit at the main table. Tendai would not speak unless spoken to. Tendai would not wear anything too noticeable. Tendai would not mention the delayed payments to the catering company, the missing figures in the events account, or the fact that Nalia had secretly charged 3 designer purchases to a corporate card tied to a Frozen project. Tendai knew all of that because she was the one forced to clean up every mess. "Did you hear me?" Jabulani asked. "Yes, father." His face hardened slightly. "Speak clearly." "Yes, father." He gave one short nod, then left with the quiet authority of a man used to people rearranging themselves for his comfort. Nalia stood next, kissed Mirembe on the cheek, and drifted away like a perfume advertisement. Only Tendai remained. Only Tendai ever remained. She moved through the house with a notepad in one hand and a tray in the other. She checked deliveries, recounted glassware, confirmed seating, smoothed wrinkles from table linen, called the chef, apologized to the florist, retrieved a necklace Nalia had accidentally left in the guest bathroom, but loudly accused a maid of stealing. Every hour brought another little humiliation dressed as responsibility. By noon, her feet hurt. By 1, she had still not eaten. By 2, she was in the back hallway carrying garment bags when she heard voices from the study. She stopped. Mirembe was inside with Jabulani. "You need to control that girl," Mirembe said. "She is becoming too observant." Jabulani answered with a dismissive grunt. "Tendai has no power. She has eyes." Mirembe shot back. "That can be dangerous enough." Tendai's breath caught. There was a pause. Then Jabulani said, "Once Nalia is settled, Tendai will no longer be our concern." The words were cold, final, almost administrative. Not our concern. Tendai stood very still in the hallway, fingers tightening around the garment bags until the plastic handles bit into her skin. She should have been used to it by then. The dismissals, the exclusions, the way her life was discussed as though she were a leaking pipe or an outdated appliance. But some wounds did not harden. They only learned to bleed quietly. She forced herself to keep walking. At the far end of this corridor, she nearly collided with a broad chest. Strong hands steadied the garment bags before they slipped. Tendai. She looked up. Kabelo. He had only been working for the family a few months, but already his presence was impossible to ignore. Tall, controlled, sharp-eyed. Always in a dark suit that fit too well for the salary they claimed to pay him. He did not speak much. He did not gossip with the staff. He did not laugh at Nalia's little insults. He simply watched. That was what unsettled people. Kabelo watched like a man measuring a room for weaknesses. "I'm sorry," Tendai said softly, stepping back. "You were not looking where you were going," he said. His tone was neutral, but not unkind. She almost smiled. That usually happens when people are carrying half the house. His mouth moved very slightly. Not quite a smile, more like the shadow of one. Then his eyes flicked toward the study door behind her. He knew she had heard something, and somehow that made her feel exposed in a way she did not like. "I should go," she murmured. Kabelo stepped aside at once. "Your grandmother was asking for you." The words changed everything in her face. "Is she all right?" "She is awake. Tired. But waiting." Tendai was already moving. Gogo Ife's room was the only place in the mansion where her shoulders truly dropped. It smelled of eucalyptus oil, books, and the faint lavender powder the old woman still insisted on using. The curtains were half open. Afternoon light rested gently on the bed. Gogo Ife looked smaller these days. Her hands were thinner, her voice weaker, but her eyes, those eyes still held more truth than the rest of the house combined. "There you are," she whispered. Tendai crossed the room quickly and knelt by the bed. "How are you feeling?" old Gogo Ife said. "And surrounded by fools." Tendai laughed despite herself. It came out fragile but real. The old woman touched her cheek. "They worked you all morning again. It's nothing." "That is your problem." Gogo Ife's voice sharpened. "You say it's nothing until your whole life becomes nothing." Tendai looked away. Gogo Ife noticed everything. Always had. She saw the exhaustion under Tendai's eyes, the careful way she hid pain, the habit of swallowing words before they could become dangerous. "I kept quiet to survive," Tendai said after a moment. "You needed care. I couldn't make things worse." A sadness passed through the older woman's face. "My child, there is a difference between carrying responsibility and allowing people to place chains on your soul." Tendai's throat tightened, because that was exactly what it felt like. Chains. Invisible. Heavy. Polite. She rested her forehead lightly against the edge of the bed. For one small moment she let herself be held by silence instead of judged by it. Then Gogo Ife said quietly, "Your mother was not weak." Tendai looked up at once. The room changed. Any mention of her mother did that. "I know," Tendai whispered. "They want you to forget her." Gogo Ife continued, "Because if you remember who she was, you might remember who you are." Before Tendai could answer, the bedroom door opened. Mirembe stood there already irritated. "Tendai, what are you doing hiding in here? The tasting table still isn't set, and Nalia wants her emerald earrings brought downstairs." Then her gaze slid to Gogo Ife, and her mouth hardened. "You should be resting, Mama, not filling the girl's head." Gogo Ife stared back with such quiet contempt that even Mirembe seemed annoyed by it. Tendai rose immediately. "I'm coming." As she turned, Gogo Ife caught her wrist. It was a weak grip, but desperate. "Do not keep bleeding for people who would not bandage your wound," the old woman whispered. Tendai swallowed hard and nodded once. She left the room carrying those words like fire under her ribs. The evening came fast. Guests arrived in silk and perfume. Laughter spilled across marble floors. Nalia descended the staircase in gold glowing beneath everyone's praise. Jabulani welcomed investors with the confidence of a man who believed appearances could still save him. And Tendai moved behind it, all invisible and essential, making beauty possible for people who offered her none. Then came the first crack. One of the junior servers rushed into the service hall, pale and trembling. The backup wine delivery never arrived. Mirembe turned on Tendai instantly. "What did you do?" "I confirmed it this morning," Tendai said. "Twice?" Nalia appeared seconds later, already furious. "Seku's family is asking for the reserve labels. If this turns into another embarrassment—" "It won't," Tendai said. But before anyone could answer, a calm male voice spoke from the doorway. "I redirected the replacement stock an hour ago," Kabelo said. "It is already at the side entrance." Everyone turned. Even Mirembe looked thrown. "How would you know?" that she demanded. Kabelo's face did not change. "Because I saw the original truck break down on the North Road. I made a call." A beat of silence followed. Then Jabulani gave a short nod. "Good. Good. No praise. No thanks. Just one curt word offered to a man he believed was beneath him." But Tendai noticed something else. For the first time all day, Mirembe had no accusation ready. Nalia had no insult sharp enough. They were too surprised. And Kabelo, standing there in his plain black suit, met Tendai's eyes for only a second. Just long enough for her to feel it. He had stepped in before the disaster could be pinned on her. Again. It was a small thing, a quiet thing. But in Tendai's world, quiet mercies were the most dangerous kind, because they made a starving heart start to hope. The morning after the engagement dinner, the Dube mansion woke to panic. Phones rang before sunrise. Staff ran through the halls whispering in frightened voices. Doors slammed. Jabulani shouted so loudly from his office that even the maids downstairs froze where they stood. Something was wrong. Something big. Tendai had barely tied her robe when Mirembe stormed into her room without knocking. "Get dressed," she snapped. "Now!" Tendai blinked, startled. What happened? "Do not ask questions. Just move." 10 minutes later, Tendai stood in the downstairs sitting room, still trying to button the sleeves of her blouse, while everyone else paced like the house was on fire. Nalia looked pale beneath her makeup. Jabulani was sweating. Mirembe's lips were pinched so tightly they had nearly disappeared, and Seku Nalia's wealthy fiancé was nowhere to be seen. Tendai's stomach tightened. "What happened?" she asked again. No one answered immediately. Then Jabulani spun toward her. The Maseko family pulled out. The words landed like thunder. "What? They cancelled the merger," Mirembe hissed. "And the engagement may collapse if we do not fix this immediately." Nalia suddenly burst into tears. They said our accounts are unstable, she screamed. They said someone leaked information about father's financial losses. Tendai's eyes widened. Financial losses? She looked instinctively toward Jabulani. His face darkened instantly. You will keep your mouth shut about anything you hear in this house, he barked. Tendai swallowed. I wasn't going to. You have already caused enough problems, Nalia shouted. Everything goes wrong whenever you're around. Tendai stared at her stunned. What does this have to do with me? Because your existence is bad luck, Nalia snapped. You poison everything? Nalia, Mirembe said softly, though there was no real correction in her tone. Not now, but the damage was done. Tendai stood frozen as all three of them looked at her, not with grief, not with stress, but calculation. Then something shifted in Jabulani's eyes. A thought. Cold, strategic. And Tendai suddenly knew that look. It was the same look he had before making decisions that ruined other people's lives. We need a distraction, he murmured. Mirembe turned to him. What a public one, he continued. Something big enough to redirect attention before word spreads. Nalia slowly stopped crying. Then her expression changed. No, she whispered. Jabulani looked at her. It is the only option. No. You promised my wedding would not be touched. It will not be, he said. Then he turned, toward Tendai. Her blood went cold. No, she whispered before he even spoke. But Jabulani was already walking toward her. You will marry today. Her heart stopped. What, you will marry Kabelo? Silence exploded through the room. Tendai stared at him in disbelief. Father, no. This family needs a public event, a spectacle, a story to shift attention before rumors spread about the business. You can't be serious. You embarrassed us enough already by existing as dead weight in this house, Mirembe cut in coldly. Now you can finally be useful. Tendai stumbled backward. You want to force me to marry the bodyguard? Nalia let out a short, bitter laugh. Oh, this is perfect. Even through her tears, she smiled. Actually, perfect. Tendai turned to her sister in horror. You think this is funny? I think it suits you, Nalia sneered. You always acted like some tragic little saint. Now you can go live your poor little life with the servant. Tears burned Tendai's eyes. No. Her voice cracked, but she stood straighter. No, I won't do it. The room changed instantly. Jabulani stepped forward so fast she flinched. His voice dropped low, dangerously calm. You will do exactly as I say. No! His hand slammed onto the table beside her. Do not test me! Tendai trembled, but didn't move. You can't force me into marriage just because your business is failing. Wrong thing to say. Jabulani's entire face darkened. Before Tendai could react, he grabbed her arm so hard she gasped. You ungrateful child, he snarled. Everything I have done for you, you've done nothing for me! The words burst out before she could stop them. The room froze. Even Mirembe looked shocked. Tendai's chest heaved. Years of pain cracked open all at once. You treat me like a servant, she cried. You blame me for everything. You let her lie, let her steal, let her destroy things, and I pay for all of it. Tendai Mirembe warned. No, Tendai shouted. Tears streamed freely now. You all hate me no matter what I do. I am tired of bleeding for people who would not bleed for me. And for 1 second, one tiny second, no one moved. Then Jabulani's voice became ice. Take her grandmother off her medication. The room went silent. Tendai's breath vanished. What Jabulani released her arm. If you refuse this marriage, Gogo Ife leaves this house today. No treatment, no nurse, no medicine. She can die wherever you choose to take her. Tendai physically staggered. No. You choose, he said coldly. Your pride or her life. Tears poured down her face instantly. "You wouldn't try me." The cruelty in his eyes told her everything. He meant it. He absolutely meant it. Tendai looked desperately toward Mirembe, toward Nalia, anyone. But they only watched. Cold, waiting. Her entire body shook. And then, very softly, her voice broke. "I'll do it." Nalia smiled. Mirembe exhaled in relief. Jabulani straightened his jacket like a businessman closing a deal. "Good." Tendai stood motionless, tears streaming silently down her face, while the people who called themselves her family immediately began discussing decorations, flowers, guests, press, timing, as if her life had just become another event to schedule. By afternoon, the house transformed into chaos. Decorators rushed through the halls, staff carried flowers, caterers rearranged tables, a string quartet was called in. Invitations went out to dozens of elite guests under the excuse of a surprise family celebration. No one outside would know the truth. They would think it romantic. They would think it spontaneous. They would never know it was an execution. Tendai sat in front of a mirror while maids forced her into a white gown, clearly altered in haste from storage. It did not fit correctly. The sleeves were too tight, the chest too loose. Even the dress felt humiliating, like something discarded and thrown onto her because she was not worth anything better. When the door opened behind her, she saw Kabelo enter. He stopped when he saw her reflection. For the first time since she had known him, he looked angry. Not loud angry, quiet angry, dangerous angry. The maids quickly left the room. Then silence. Tendai didn't turn. "Did you know?" she whispered. No answer. She finally looked at him. "Did you know they planned this?" Kabelo's jaw tightened. "No." Pain flashed across her face. "Then why did you agree?" That question lingered. Heavy. Complicated. Then Kabelo stepped closer. His voice was low. "Because if I refused, they would have found another way to destroy you." Tendai's tears returned. "So your solution was to let them hand me to you like property?" His eyes darkened. "No." "Then what is this?" Kabelo stared at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "A chance for me to protect you where they cannot reach." Her breath caught. The words hit something inside her, but she was too broken to trust them, too hurt, too raw. She looked away. "You're still one of them," she whispered. Pain flickered across his face, then disappeared. "Perhaps," he said softly. And that answer somehow hurt more than if he had lied. That night, beneath golden lights and crystal chandeliers, Tendai stood in front of hundreds of smiling guests, while her soul shattered piece by piece. The officiant smiled. Guests whispered. Cameras flashed. And beside her stood Kabelo, calm, unreadable, terrifyingly composed. When the vows came, Tendai could barely speak hers. When Kabelo spoke his voice was steady, firm, certain, as if this marriage meant more to him than anyone understood. Then came the kiss. He leaned close, stopped just near enough for the room to believe it, and whispered against her ear, "Trust me." Her breath caught. Then applause erupted. Laughter, cheers, champagne glasses lifted, and across the room Tendai saw her family smiling triumphantly, thinking they had won, thinking they had destroyed her. But standing beside her, Kabelo looked not like a defeated servant, not like a humiliated poor man, but like someone watching a game unfold exactly as planned. And for the first time, Tendai wondered if perhaps the most dangerous person in the room was not her father. The drive away from the Doob mansion was so quiet, It became its own kind of violence. Tendai sat rigid in the back seat, her wedding dress spread stiffly around her like evidence from a crime scene. She had removed the veil the moment the gates closed behind them, but the silk gown still clung to her body, heavy with perfume, sweat, and humiliation. Every time the car rolled over a bump, the beading scratched lightly against her arms. Kabelo sat beside her, not touching her, not speaking. In the front, the driver kept his eyes on the road. The city lights slid past the windows in streaks of gold and white, then slowly thinned as they left the wealthy district behind. Tendai watched the skyline disappear and told herself not to cry again. She had cried enough for one lifetime. At last she spoke. "Where are we going?" Kabelo answered without looking at her. "Home." The word made something bitter rise in her throat. "Whose home?" His gaze shifted to her then. Calm. Direct. Impossible to read. "Ours." For now. Tendai gave a soft, humorless laugh. "You say that like this is some arrangement we both agreed to." Kabelo did not react. "No. I say it because you need somewhere safe tonight." Safe. The word sounded almost offensive. Safe from whom, she asked. "My family or you?" For the first time his face changed. Not anger, not offense, something quieter, heavier. "You do not need to be afraid of me. Everyone says that right before they prove otherwise." The car fell silent again. Outside, the roads grew emptier. They passed shuttered storefronts, then a long stretch of dark trees, then a set of high stone walls Tendai did not recognize. The gates opened before the driver even slowed. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Not wrong in a frightening way. Wrong in a way that did not fit the story she had been told. The car rolled into a private compound hidden behind thick hedges and low modern buildings. It was not a mansion. It was not flashy. It did not scream wealth the way her father's home did. But everything about it was precise, controlled, expensive in the kind of way only old money or disciplined power ever was. The driveway stones were hand-cut. The exterior lights were warm and perfectly placed. The guards at the gate wore discreet earpieces and nodded to Kabelo with something very close to respect. Not pity. Not casual familiarity. Respect. Tendai noticed it immediately. Her pulse changed. The driver stepped out and opened her door. Before she could gather the fabric of her dress, another woman appeared from the entrance. Middle-aged, neatly dressed, composed. "Good evening, sir," she said to Kabelo. "Sir." Tendai looked sharply at him. Kabelo gave the woman a brief nod. "Lorato, prepare the East Suite for Mrs. Doobie." "Mrs. Doob." The title struck her harder than the wedding vows had. Lorato glanced at Tendai, and there was no mockery in her face, no curiosity either, only kindness, gentle and professional. "Yes, sir. Sir again." Tendai stepped out of the car slowly, her wedding shoes sinking slightly into the gravel edge before touching polished stone. She looked around. 2 more staff members appeared without being called. One took her small bag from the trunk. Another opened the front doors. Nobody looked surprised to see her. Nobody stared at the dress. Nobody smirked. It made the whole scene stranger. Inside the house was even more unsettling. Minimalist. Quiet. Beautiful. Cream walls, dark wood, clean lines, African art chosen with real care not to impress guests. The air smelled faintly of cedar and citrus, not the suffocating cloud of designer perfume that lived in her father's house. Somewhere deeper inside, soft instrumental music played low enough to calm rather than perform. This was not how poor men lived, not even close. Tendai stopped in the center of the entrance hall. Kabelo turned to her. "What is this place, my residence?" She stared at him. A bodyguard's residence. His expression did not shift. A man can live many kinds of lives. That is not an answer. No, he said evenly. It is not. Her chest tightened. This night had already taken everything from her, her dignity, her choices, the last weak thread tying her to the illusion of family. She had no strength left for riddles. "Do not speak to me in puzzles," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "I was humiliated in front of half the city. I was blackmailed into marriage. I was brought here to a house that makes no sense. So for once tonight, just tell me the truth." Kabelo held her gaze. Then he said, "The truth is that you are exhausted, angry, and in no state to process the full answer." Tendai almost laughed in disbelief. "You do not get to decide what I can process." "No," he said, "but I do get to decide what will put you in more danger tonight." That stopped her. A small silence opened between them. Danger. The word returned, and this time it did not feel abstract. Tendai lowered her voice. What danger, Kabelo seemed to weigh something internally. Then he answered with brutal simplicity, "Your father will not stop with the wedding." Her stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means men like Jabbulani do not create spectacles unless they are hiding something larger. His tone remained controlled, but his eyes had sharpened. And when control slips, they do not panic. They bury. They erase. They move pieces off the board. A chill moved down her spine. "Are you saying he would hurt me?" Kabelo's jaw tightened. "I am saying your value to him changed tonight." She stared at him, and because she was not stupid, because years of surviving that house had taught her to hear what people meant even when they lied to themselves, she understood. Before tonight, she had been useful because she could be blamed, controlled, positioned. Now she had become something else. A witness. A risk. Larato returned then, saving Tendai from the full force of that thought. "The suite is ready." Kabelo nodded. "Show her." Tendai did not move. "You're not coming." His eyes met hers. "Only if you ask me to." The answer unsettled her more than insistence would have. She looked away first. "I can walk." Larato led her down a corridor lit by wall lamps and moonlight. The suite at the far end was larger than Tendai had expected, but still restrained. A sitting area. A bedroom with soft linen and carved side tables. A bathroom bigger than the one Mirembe used to boast about to guests. On a chair near the window sat a folded set of new clothes in her size. Someone had planned for this. Or someone planned for everything. Larato noticed where her eyes landed. "There is hot water ready, madam. Tea as well, if you would like." Tendai almost said, "Don't call me that." But she was too tired. "Thank you." Larato hesitated. "You have no reason to trust this house tonight." "I understand that, but no one here will mistreat you." The gentleness in her voice nearly broke something inside Tendai. "No one here will mistreat you." Such a simple sentence, so ordinary, and yet it felt more unfamiliar than the expensive room, the careful lighting, the respectful staff, even the strange security outside. After Larato left, Tendai stood alone for a long time. Then she finally peeled herself out of the wedding dress. It slid to the floor in a heap of white silk and glittering humiliation. She stared at it, then stepped over it and walked into the shower. The hot water hit her shoulders and she almost collapsed. The day replayed in flashes. Nalia's laugh, her father's hand gripping her arm, the officiant smiling, the applause, Kabelo whispering, "Trust me." By the time she came back out, wrapped in a soft robe that was not hers, the tea had gone warm. She sat on the edge of the bed and tried not to think. Tried not to feel. Failed at both. A knock came at the door. Soft, measured. She stiffened. "Yes, it's me," Kabelo said. She should have told him to leave. Instead, after a pause, she said, "Come in." He entered without haste, dressed now in black trousers and a charcoal shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. Without the bodyguard jacket, he looked less like hired security and more like something else entirely. Something more dangerous, or more powerful. He set a small paper bag on the side table. "You did not eat." Tendai looked at it, then at him. "You noticed, I notice most things. That sounds like a warning. It is a fact." Despite herself, she asked, "What's in the bag?" "Chicken pies from a place near the old market. Lorato said you used to like them." That surprised her so much she forgot her anger for a second. How would Lorato know that Kabelo was silent? "Then I ask questions." Her eyes narrowed. "About me?" "Yes." The room changed again. Not romantic, not tender, sharper than that. Why? He took a moment before answering. "Because by the time I realized what your family intended, I needed to know how to protect you properly." The words landed somewhere deep. Tendai hated that they did. She folded her arms. "You keep talking like this marriage happened to you not because of you." His expression hardened slightly. "I did not ask for that ceremony. But you stood there. Yes, you said vows. Yes, you let them laugh at me." Something flickered in his face then. Regret, maybe. Or fury turned inward. "When I step in too early," he said quietly, "people hide what they are. Tonight I needed them exposed." Tendai stared at him. Her voice dropped. "So I was bait?" "No." The answer came too fast, too sharply. But when he saw the look on her face, he slowed down. "No," he repeated lower now. "You were the line." She didn't understand, and he did not explain. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a phone, glanced at the screen, and his entire body shifted. Subtle. Instant. The relaxed stillness vanished. In its place came command. "What is it?" Tendai asked. He did not answer her immediately. He was already typing, already moving toward the window. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Cooler. Harder. The voice of someone used to giving orders and being obeyed. "Lock this door after me," he said. Every nerve in Tendai's body went alert. "Kabelo." He turned. For 1 second the mask slipped. She saw it clearly, then concern, calculation, anger, all compressed into discipline. "Your father just sent 2 men to your grandmother's wing," he said. "Stay inside." Then he was gone. Tendai shot to her feet. The door clicked shut behind him. And for the first time since the forced wedding, she forgot to feel humiliated. Because something far worse had just begun. Tendai did not lock the door. For 3 full seconds after Kabelo left, she stood frozen in the middle of the room, one hand gripping the edge of the robe at her throat, the other still hanging uselessly at her side. His words echoed through her like a struck bell. "Your father just sent 2 men to your grandmother's wing." At first her mind rejected it. Even after everything Jabulani had done, some part of her still tried to soften him, to call his cruelty strategy instead of evil. But the deeper truth rose quickly and without mercy. He had threatened Gogo Ifa once already. He would do it again. Tendai rushed to the door and opened it. 2 guards were already in the corridor. Not the polished men from her father's house. These were different. Quiet. Alert. Built like professionals, not decorations. One turned toward her immediately. "Madam, please go back inside. My grandmother is in danger." "We know," the taller one said. The answer stopped her cold. "We know," he touched the earpiece in his right ear, listening. "Sir is handling it. Sir!" Again. That word struck her harder each time she heard it. Tendai stepped into the hallway anyway. "I'm not staying in that room while nobody tells me what's happening." The 2 men exchanged one quick look. Not annoyed. Assessing. Then the shorter guard spoke. "The vehicle is being prepared. You may be moved downstairs. Moved where? Somewhere safer." Safer. Another word that had started to feel unreal. Before she could demand more, footsteps came fast at the far end of the corridor. Lorato appeared first, carrying a folded shawl and a pair of flat shoes. Behind her came Kabelo. He was no longer just composed. He was in command. The change was impossible to miss now. His phone was in one hand, and two more men followed at a distance, waiting for instructions before he even gave them. His face looked carved from stone. Tendai moved toward him immediately. "What happened?" Kabelo stopped in front of her. "Put these on." She stared. "Tell me first. Put them on." His tone was calm but not negotiable. For 1 second her temper surged. She was tired of being ordered, tired of men deciding what she could know and when she could know it. But then she looked into his eyes and saw it. Not secrecy for control. Urgency. Real urgency. Lorato knelt to help Tendai into the shoes while Kabelo turned slightly and spoke into his phone. "No police yet? Not until the old woman is physically secured. If Jabulani sees uniforms, he'll shift the story before we have witnesses in place." Tendai's pulse spiked. Witnesses shift the story. Her father was not just sending men to frighten Gogo If. He was doing something larger, something deliberate enough that Kabelo was already thinking 3 steps ahead. When Lorato draped the shawl over Tendai's shoulders, Kabelo ended the call and looked at her again. "We're leaving. For the mansion number, for the clinic." Tendai blinked. What clinic? The one your grandmother should have been in weeks ago. Everything inside her tightened. "What do you mean, should have been?" Kabelo did not answer immediately. That silence told her more than words could have. Her father had been cutting corners again. On treatment, on medication, on care. Her jaw trembled. "If anything happens to her, it won't," Kabelo said. He said it with such certainty that her anger collided headfirst with something more dangerous. Hope. She hated hope. Hope had betrayed her more than cruelty ever had. They moved quickly through the house and into another vehicle waiting at the side entrance. This one was larger, darker, with tinted windows, and a second SUV idling behind it. Tendai noticed details now, the way pain sharpened instinct. The drivers wore coordinated earpieces. Routes were confirmed before doors closed. One man checked the rear lane with a flashlight before waving them forward. This was not how ordinary bodyguards moved. Inside the car, Tendai sat beside Kabelo again. This time she did not wait in silence. "Enough," she said. "No more half answers. Who are these people? Why do they listen to you like that? Why does everyone here call you Sir? And what exactly were those men doing at my grandmother's room?" Kabelo leaned back, one hand resting near his phone. His eyes on the road ahead. They were removing her nurse. Tendai's breath stopped. "What?" The regular nurse was dismissed an hour after the wedding. "Your father replaced her with 2 orderlies from a facility he uses off record." Her stomach lurched. "A facility?" "Yes. What kind of facility?" He looked at her then, and there was no gentleness in his answer. The kind people use when they want inconvenient relatives kept quiet. Tendai turned white. For a moment she could not breathe. The car seemed smaller, the air thinner, the city beyond the tinted glass unreal. She saw Gogo Ife's thin hands, her tired smile, her whisper from the bed. "Do not keep bleeding for people who would not bandage your wound." He was going to move her, Tendai said almost to herself. "Yes. Tonight, yes, because of me." Kabelo's voice hardened. Because of himself. But Tendai was already spiraling through the truth. Her father had forced the marriage. He had staged the spectacle. The business problems were worse than they looked. And now he was removing the one person in that house who remembered too much, who loved Tendai too openly, who might refuse to stay silent. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "I should never have left her there." Kabelo's jaw tightened. You left because you were blackmailed. I still left. You stayed alive. She turned sharply toward him. That is not the same thing. No, he said quietly. But it matters. The car sped through a red light under escort. Tendai looked at him through blurred vision. How did you know? He hesitated. Then I had your father watched. Her eyes widened. For how long? Long enough. Why? The question came out broken, not angry, not even accusing, just tired. Kabelo looked forward again before answering. Because men like Jabulani rarely humiliate one child in public unless they are preparing to hide something larger in private. The sentence sat between them. Then she asked the harder question. How much did you already know about my family before tonight? Too much, his silence said. Far too much. Tendai laughed once, and the sound was sharp with pain. So while I was being dragged to an altar, you were already watching everyone like pieces on a board. No, that's exactly what it sounds like. He turned to her fully now. I was watching the people hurting you. She held his gaze, furious at herself for feeling the difference. At the clinic gates, the convoy slowed. This place was nothing like the public hospitals her father liked to donate to for newspaper photos. It was private quiet hidden behind jacaranda trees and a low cream wall. Medical staff were already waiting under the lights. One of them opened the car door before the vehicle fully stopped. Kabelo, the older doctor, said, his voice clipped but respectful. We're ready. Tendai heard it. Not Mr. Dube's guard, not Bodyguard. Just his name spoken like someone well known in rooms where decisions mattered. She got out and saw Gogo Ife immediately. The old woman was being wheeled through the side entrance, beneath warm blankets, her oxygen line secure, her face pale but conscious. Beside her walked a frightened young nurse Tendai recognized from the mansion. Tendai ran. Gogo Ife turned her head slowly. When she saw Tendai, relief passed over her face like sunlight breaking through rain. There you are, she whispered. Tendai fell to her knees beside the wheelchair and took both her hands. I'm here. I'm here. The nurse looked up at Kabelo. They tried to sign transfer papers in the daughter's absence. I stalled them as long as I could. Kabelo gave one short nod. You did well. Tendai looked from the nurse to Kabelo, stunned. He had people inside. Not just guards outside his own house, not just watchers on roads and gates. Inside, everywhere. The doctor stepped closer. She needs observation, but she's stable. We've corrected the medication discrepancy. Tendai turned sharply. Discrepancy? The doctor's mouth tightened. Someone had halved 2 of her prescriptions over the last 10 days. Her blood ran cold. Slowly. Carefully. Systematically. Not enough to kill at once. Enough to weaken. Enough to make her easier to move. Tendai stood up too fast, fury burning straight through grief. He did this. No one answered. They didn't need to. Gogo Ife squeezed her fingers weakly. Child? Tendai bent close again. The old woman's eyes moved past her shoulder toward Kabelo. There was exhaustion in them, but also recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. And that was when Tendai truly felt the ground shift beneath her. Gogo Ife knew something she did not. The old woman's voice was thin, almost threadbare, but clear enough. I told you, she whispered to Tendai. The quiet ones are never powerless. Tendai turned slowly. Kabelo stood a few feet away under the clinic lights, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a phone that had not stopped vibrating for almost an hour. Men around him waited without speaking. The doctor had greeted him like an equal. The nurse had taken instructions from him. Even Gogo Ife looked at him as if she had already placed him somewhere in a story Tendai had not yet heard. Then his phone lit again. He glanced at the screen, and for the briefest second, Tendai saw a name reflected there before he turned it away. Chairman Board Line 1. Her breath caught. Chairman, not security chief, not operations. Chairman. Kabelo looked up and found her staring. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. But in that one suspended moment, Tendai knew with terrifying certainty that the man her family had called poor was hiding something far bigger than money. Tendai did not sleep that night. Even after Gogo Ife was moved into a private room and the doctors assured her that the worst danger had passed, her body remained too tense to rest. She sat by the hospital window in a hard-backed chair, wrapped in the shawl Lorato had given her, watching the city fade from black to grey. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw something different. Her father's face when he said, "You choose." The false smiles at the wedding. The men outside her grandmother's room. And then over and over again the reflection on Kabelo's phone. Chairman Board Line 1. Not a bodyguard. Not even close. By dawn, anger had become easier to hold than fear. That was what kept her upright when the nurse came in with tea. "That gentleman is still outside," the nurse said softly. Tendai looked up. "What gentleman? The one who brought your grandmother here? As if there could be any other." She rose at once and walked into the corridor. Kabelo was at the far end, near a glass wall overlooking the courtyard. He had changed clothes some time before sunrise. The plain, dark shirt was gone. Now he wore a slate-grey suit so sharply cut it made the truth harder to ignore. Even standing still, he no longer looked like hired protection. He looked like a man other powerful men would be careful around. One hand rested in his pocket. The other held a folder. Two men stood several feet away, speaking quietly into earpieces. When Kabelo turned and saw Tendai approaching, he said something short to them in a low voice. They moved away at once. Again they obeyed without question. Tendai stopped a few steps from him. "How long were you going to keep lying?" No greeting, no softness, no pretense. Kabelo met her eyes steadily. "That depends on what you believe I lied about." The answer made her laugh once, short, hollow, furious. "That is not clever. Not today. I am not trying to be clever. You let my family call you poor. You let them treat you like furniture. You let them force me into marriage while you stood there wearing a lie." His jaw tightened almost invisibly. Yes. The bluntness of it hit harder than denial would have. Tendai stared at him. "So just say it. Say it clearly for once. Who are you?" For a moment the corridor fell completely silent. Even the sounds from the nurse's station seemed to fade. Then Kabelo answered. "My name is Kabelo Afolayan." Tendai waited. He continued. "I am the majority heir to Afolayan Capital and executive chairman of the Orison Group." There it was. No riddle, no half-truth, no polished evasion. Just the impossible thing said aloud. Tendai felt the words travel through her in stages. First shock, then disbelief, then the awful, humiliating understanding that every strange detail had been real all along. The guarded compound, the respectful staff, the men with earpieces, the doctor's tone, the board line, everything. Her voice came out low and sharp. "A billionaire." "Yes?" She looked away because she could not bear to keep looking at him while the full-tall insult unfolded in her mind. "You let them mock you." "Yes. You let them mock me for marrying you." His voice dropped. "Yes." Tendai folded her arms over herself so tightly it almost hurt. Why, that one word held everything. Anger, exhaustion, betrayal, shame, even a little desperate confusion. Why would a man like him do this? Why come into her father's house in disguise? Why stay silent through her humiliation? Why marry her at all? Kabelo did not answer immediately. Instead, he held out the folder in his hand. "Because your family was already under investigation before I ever entered that house." Tendai looked at the folder but did not take it. For what fraud? Asset diversion, proxy accounts, illicit transfers tied to government contracts. His tone was steady, controlled, mercilessly precise. Your father has been moving money through shell vendors for years. Recently he became careless, or desperate. Tendai's heart began to pound again. She knew Jabulani lied. She knew he manipulated. She knew he was hiding losses. But hearing the scale of it dragged the truth into another dimension. This is about business. It began that way. The words chilled her. Began that way. She took the folder from him at last. Inside were copies of transaction trails, internal memos, photographs, account references, property transfers, even scanned signatures. Some pages carried Jabulani's name. Others carried companies Tendai vaguely recognized from dinner conversations or event sponsorship banners. And then she saw one line that made her stop breathing. Provisional liability transfer contingent, fallback signatory, Tendai Dube. Her hands went cold. She looked up at him slowly. What is this? Kabelo's face hardened. Your father prepared documents that would place legal exposure on you if his primary structure collapsed. Tendai's fingers trembled around the file. No. Yes. He used my name, yes. For what? To protect Nalia. To preserve the engagement. To create a family scapegoat with limited power to fight back. Each sentence hit like a blow. Tendai stared at the page again, unable to process how cleanly he had said it. Not because he lacked feeling, but because he had already processed it long ago. He had already studied the cruelty that had only just reached her. Something violent moved through her chest. So while I was setting dinner tables and apologizing to florists, my father was preparing to bury me alive in his crimes. Kabelo said nothing. He did not need to. The silence confirmed it. Tendai shut the folder with a sharp motion. And you knew? Yes. You knew all of this before the wedding? Yes. The hallway seemed to tilt. For 1 second, all she could feel was rage. Not just at her father. At him. At this man who had walked into her life carrying hidden power, hidden knowledge, hidden motives, and still had the nerve to whisper, "Trust me," while her world burned around her. She stepped closer. So tell me something, Chairman. The title came out like an accusation. Was I ever a person to you? Or was I just useful evidence in a better dress that landed? She saw it land. For the first time since the conversation began, something broke through Kabelo's discipline. Not weakness. Pain. Real, unguarded pain. No. No what? No, you were not evidence to me. Then what was I? He held her gaze. At first he said quietly, "A variable I did not expect." The answer slapped her. A variable. Not a woman. Not a victim. Not even a witness. A variable. Tendai laughed, and tears sprang instantly to her eyes. That is the cruelest, honest thing anyone has ever said to me. His voice remained low. You asked for truth. I asked for humanity. Something passed over his face, then regret sharpened by self-disgust. He took one slow breath. When I entered your father's circle, I expected greed, vanity, opportunism. I expected a family trying to hide collapse beneath social theater. His eyes stayed on hers. I did not expect you. Tendai wanted not to listen, but she did, because despite herself, she needed to hear how he justified any of this. I watched you cover for staff who were afraid of your stepmother. I watched you take blame that belonged to Nalia because your grandmother's treatment depended on peace in the house. I watched you hand your own jewelry to a cook whose son needed surgery, then pretend you had lost it so no one would repay you. I watched you survive humiliation without becoming cruel. Tendai's throat tightened dangerously. He knew too much. Not facts now. Her. That was somehow worse. And what did you do with all that information? She asked barely above a whisper. Did it make the investigation more interesting? His answer came at once. It made it impossible to stay detached. She looked at him and hated that part of her believed him, hated it even more when she saw that he hated himself for not stepping in sooner. "Then why didn't you stop it?" she asked. "The wedding? The threats? The laughter? Why didn't you end it before they dragged me to that altar?" For the first time, Kabelo looked away. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Gone was the executive certainty. Gone was the measured dominance. What remained sounded brutally human. "Because I miscalculated." She frowned through tears. "What does that mean?" "It means I believed Jabulani would pressure you, disinherit you, publicly degrade you." His jaw flexed. "I did not believe he would weaponize your grandmother's life in the final hour." Tendai's anger faltered just enough for new pain to get in. "So you were wrong." "Yes, and I paid for it." His silence said yes before his mouth ever could. Tendai stepped back from him, breathing unevenly. The corridor suddenly felt too bright, too exposed. Nurses passed in the distance. Somewhere a monitor beeped steadily behind a closed door. Life was continuing around her as if the ground beneath her feet had not just split open again. "I married a stranger," she said. Kabelo's face remained still, but his eyes changed. "No," he said quietly. "You married a man who should have told you the truth sooner." She shook her head. "That is not better." "I know." The simplicity of it stripped away any place for more performance. He was not defending himself now, not hiding, not pretending the damage was smaller than it was. And that honesty arriving this late only made Tendai feel more exhausted. She pressed a hand to her forehead and closed her eyes. "When did you plan to tell me?" "Soon." She opened her eyes instantly. "That means nothing. It means I was waiting until I could move your grandmother, secure the financial records, and isolate your father's external access." She stared at him. Business terms, crisis terms, protection wrapped in strategy. That was how he spoke when he was closest to panic. And somehow she understood that too. Before she could answer, one of the men from earlier approached quickly, but stopped at a respectful distance. "Sir?" Kabelo turned slightly. "What is it?" "The board is requesting immediate confirmation on the Nairobi call. Also," the man hesitated, then looked briefly at Tendai. "There's movement from Dube Holdings. They're trying to freeze 2 linked accounts." Kabelo's expression transformed in a heartbeat. Calm, cold, commanding. "Tell legal to proceed with the injunction. Lock the vendor channels. And no one touches the grandmother's historical file without my direct clearance." "Yes, sir." The man left. Tendai stood very still. There it was again. The shift. The impossible authority. The world rearranging itself around his voice. Slowly she looked at him. "You really are who you say you are." Kabelo met her gaze. "Yes." She swallowed. Then, with all the hurt still burning in her chest, she asked the question she had been avoiding since dawn. "And this marriage?" For the first time all morning he did not answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was so low she almost missed it. "It stopped being part of the investigation the moment I saw what they were doing to you." The words hung between them. Dangerous words. Because if they were true, then everything had just become more complicated than betrayal. It had become personal. Tendai did not answer him. She could not. Not because she had nothing to say, but because too many truths had arrived at once, and none of them fit together cleanly. Her family had planned to bury her beneath their crimes. Kabelo had entered her life under false pretenses. He had watched. He had waited. He had miscalculated. And somewhere inside all of that, he was now telling her that what stood between them was no longer strategy. It was personal. That should have made things simpler. Instead, it made everything more dangerous. She took one step back, still holding the folder against her chest like a shield. "My whole life," she said quietly, "the people who claimed to protect me were the same people deciding what I was allowed to know. My father did it with money. Mirembe did it with fear. Nalia did it with lies. Her eyes lifted to his. And now you do it with secrets. Kabelo absorbed the accusation without flinching. You are right. The answer disarmed her more than denial would have. There was no argument in him, no performance, no effort to dress the wound in prettier language, just that. You are right. Tendai laughed once under her breath, but there was no humor in it. That must make life very easy for you, to always say the calm thing, the measured thing, the thing that sounds honest without changing what already happened. A flicker moved across his face. Not anger, weariness. I do not expect calm to be enough. Then what do you expect? He held her gaze. Consequences. That word landed deeper than she wanted. Because it sounded real. Because it sounded like a man who already knew he had crossed a line and was not asking to be excused for it. Still, pain does not become trust just because someone names it correctly. Tendai turned away from him and paced toward the far end of the corridor, then back again. Her mind would not stay still. Every memory from the past few weeks kept changing shape under new light. The first time Kabelo had appeared behind her in a hallway before a tray slipped from her hands. The way he had known Gogo Ife was asking for her. The strange respect from certain guests at the engagement dinner. The replacement wine arriving before disaster could be blamed on her. The compound, the staff, the clinic, the board line. Had every moment been real, or had every moment been arranged, she stopped walking. Did you already know about my mother? Kabelo's eyes narrowed slightly, not from suspicion, but because he understood at once that the question mattered more than it seemed. Not everything he said. Only fragments. What fragments that she died with unresolved legal interests attached to the Dube estate? Tendai's stomach tightened. Legal interests. He nodded once. Property structures. Deferred claims. A trust position that appears to have been interrupted. Interrupted. Such a polished word for theft. Tendai's mouth went dry. Say it plainly. His voice lowered. It appears your father may have buried part of what was left to you. She shut her eyes. For years, Mirembe had repeated the same poison until it almost became air in the house. Tendai contributes nothing. Tendai owns nothing. Tendai should be grateful we kept her. And all that time there might have been something hidden. Something her mother intended for her. Something deliberately erased. When she opened her eyes again, they burned. Did Gogo Ife know? I believe she suspected. I do not know how much she could prove. Tendai swallowed hard. That explained certain things now. The way her grandmother always insisted that quiet was not the same as peace. The way she kept looking at Tendai, as if trying to hand her an inheritance made of memory when paper could no longer be trusted. At the far end of the hall, a nurse stepped out of Gogo Ife's room and gave Tendai a small, reassuring nod. Stable. For now. Tendai nodded back, then turned to Kabelo again. Nalia knows something too. He watched her carefully. Why do you say that? Because she stopped being merely cruel weeks ago. Tendai tightened her grip on the folder. She became nervous, possessive. She started asking strange questions whenever father took calls behind closed doors. And after the engagement dinner, when the Maseko family pulled back, she wasn't just panicking. She was terrified. Kabelo was silent for a moment, then said, We think she discovered one of the fallback structures. Tendai frowned. What does that mean? It means Jabulani was preparing more than one escape route. His tone sharpened slightly into analysis. If the merger failed, he needed someone to absorb liability. If the investigation moved publicly, he needed internal chaos to distract from the records. And if his financial position collapsed completely, he needed the appearance of family unity around one daughter while the other was isolated. Tendai understood. Not all at once, but enough. Nalia was the polished daughter, she said slowly. The acceptable one. The one he could still sell to the world. Yes. And I was the disposable one. Kabelo said nothing. He did not need to. The silence agreed. Something cold settled in Tendai's spine. So the forced wedding wasn't just punishment. No, it was timing. Yes. The answer came like a blade. Tendai turned toward the glass wall again. Outside, morning had fully broken over the clinic courtyard. Nurses crossed between buildings carrying files. A groundskeeper watered the flower beds with indifferent patience. Somewhere beyond those walls, the city was waking into ordinary routines. But Tendai's life had left ordinary far behind. She spoke without turning. "When did you realize he meant to use me that way?" Kabelo answered after a pause. "The day I saw a liability draft carrying your provisional signature block." She spun back around. "And you still stayed undercover. I needed admissible proof." "You needed evidence," she shot back. "Always evidence. Always timing. Always one move later than my pain." That struck deeper than the earlier accusations. She saw it in the tightening of his jaw. "Yes," he said quietly. "And that is the part I cannot undo." For a moment neither of them moved. Then Tendai gave a bitter smile through tears she no longer bothered hiding. "Do you know what the worst part is?" His eyes stayed on hers. "Tell me." "The worst part is not that you lied." Her voice shook once, then steadied. "It's that I believed you before I knew why." Something in his face changed then, not visibly to anyone who did not know how to look. But Tendai had spent years surviving rooms by studying what people tried not to show. She saw the impact. She had mattered to him before the truth was safe. And that made the wound worse, not better. Because if he had cared, he could have shattered the game sooner. Unless the thought came suddenly and almost against her will. Unless the game was larger than she understood even now. She narrowed her eyes. "What are you not telling me?" Kabelo's gaze sharpened. "You're still holding something back," she said. "I can see it." He exhaled slowly. Then he glanced down the corridor, ensuring they were alone enough for what came next. "Your father is not acting alone." The sentence dropped between them like a stone into deep water. Tendai stared. "What we have reason to believe at least one external partner has been helping him move funds and shape false reporting. Possibly two. One from inside a contracting board. One from within a family alliance." Her thoughts raced. "The Masekos, possibly," he said. "Or someone using them. We are still confirming." Tendai's face hardened. So Nalia's engagement may have been more strategic than romantic. A laugh escaped her, sharp and broken. Of course it was. Nothing in that house had ever been innocent. Even love had been arranged like furniture. "Does Nalia know?" "We do not know how much she understands." Kabelo paused. "But we know she found enough to become frightened. And frightened people in collapsing houses become dangerous very quickly." Tendai thought of her sister's face at the breakfast panic. The tears, the fury, the way cruelty had mixed with desperation until it was hard to tell which drove her more. Nalia was vicious, yes, but she was also terrified of losing position. Terrified daughters of corrupt fathers often did terrible things trying to stay loved. "What do you think she'll do?" Tendai asked. Kabelo answered without hesitation. "Try to get to you before the records settle." A chill went through her. "Why me?" "Because you are the cleanest place to redirect blame," he said. "And now that you are also legally married to me, you have become a threat to anyone who suspects what I can reach." Tendai stared at him. There it was again, that impossible collision between her humiliation and his hidden power. The marriage that had been staged as her ruin had quietly altered the balance of the room. To her family, she had been buried. To the people outside the family, she had suddenly become attached to a man with enormous influence. No wonder Jabulani had moved on Gogo Ife so quickly. No wonder the panic inside the mansion must be rising by the hour. Tendai drew in a slow breath. Then she'll come smiling first. Kabelo watched her. What Nalia? Tendai's eyes hardened with painful clarity. She never strikes with her true face first. She flatters before she poisons. She cries before she lies. She'll come to me as a sister before she comes as an enemy. For the first time that morning, something like approval moved through Kabelo's expression. Yes, he said. That is exactly what I think. Tendai looked at him, tired to the bone, wounded in more places than she could name, but suddenly sharper than she had been the day before. The victim her family had dragged to an altar was still in her somewhere, but she was no longer alone in the room, and no longer blind. When she comes, Tendai said, I want to face her myself. Kabelo's expression turned unreadable again. That may not be wise. No, Tendai said, holding his gaze. But it will be necessary. Before he could answer, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Then his face changed. Not into panic, into certainty. He looked up at her once directly. She's faster than I expected, he said. Tendai's pulse kicked. What happened? Kabelo lowered the phone slowly. Nalia just requested to visit your grandmother. The message sat between them like a lit fuse. Nalia just requested to visit your grandmother. For 1 second, Tendai forgot how to breathe. Then every instinct she had developed in the Dube mansion rose at once. Not fear first, pattern first. Nalia never moved without purpose. She smiled when she wanted access. She cried when she wanted cover. She arrived fragile when she was about to do something cruel. Tendai's hand tightened around the folder until the paper edge pressed into her palm. She knows I'm here. Kabelo slipped the phone back into his pocket. Yes, she knows Gogo Ife is stable. Likely. And she did not come out of concern. No. The certainty in his voice steadied her more than comfort would have. A nurse passed at the far end of the corridor with a tray of medication. Morning light poured across the polished floor. Somewhere nearby, a heart monitor gave its soft, rhythmic beeping. The clinic remained calm, professional, almost gentle. But beneath that calm, Tendai could feel the next confrontation already forming. I want to see her, she said. Kabelo looked at her for a long moment. You may not like what she says. Tendai let out a cold breath. I stopped liking what my family says years ago. That is not what I meant. She understood anyway. He meant Nalia would come wearing a new face, not the openly vicious sister from the mansion, not the laughing girl at the wedding. This version would likely be cleverer, softer, designed to get under skin rather than slash it. Good. Tendai was tired of being ambushed by the versions of other people she refused to imagine. Let her in, she said. Kabelo did not move. You are asking for a direct confrontation while exhausted, angry, and still carrying incomplete information. And you are still deciding what I can handle. His jaw tightened. That landed. Tendai held his gaze. I am not asking you to save me from my sister. I'm asking you not to stand in the way. Something passed silently between them then. Irritation, respect, recognition. He was beginning to understand that protecting her and controlling access to her were not the same thing. Tendai saw the exact moment he chose not to argue further. All right, he said at last. But not alone. Fine, I'll be nearby. Not in the room. His eyes narrowed. Tendai. She won't speak freely if you are standing over her shoulder like a judge. That is the point. No, Tendai said quietly. The point is to hear what she thinks she can still get away with. That changed his expression. Not surrender. Recalculation. He understood now. She was no longer asking to survive the family dynamic. She was asking to use it. 15 minutes, he said, and one signal from you ends it. Tendai nodded once. Nalia arrived 20 minutes later. Even prepared, Tendai nearly laughed when she saw her. Nalia had chosen a pale blue dress, soft enough to imply innocence, expensive enough to maintain status. Her makeup was lighter than usual. Her hair fell in careful waves around a face arranged into sadness. She carried a bouquet of white lilies, as if she were visiting a convalescent aunt rather than the grandmother, whose medication had been quietly tampered with under her father's roof. Manipulation had always been her most polished skill. The receptionist led her to a private consultation room near Gogo Ife's wing instead of the hospital room itself. Kabelo had insisted on that much, and Tendai agreed. Nalia would not get near the old woman until Tendai understood what she wanted. When Nalia stepped inside and saw Tendai waiting rather than a nurse, she faltered, only for half a second. Then her face softened further. Tendai. The tenderness in her voice would have fooled strangers. It did not fool blood. Tendai remained seated. You came quickly. Nalia closed the door behind her with delicate care. Of course I did. She's our grandmother. Our grandmother? Interesting. When property or image was involved, family language always returned. Nalia held out the flowers slightly. I brought these for her. Tendai looked at the bouquet, then back at her sister. That was thoughtful. Nalia hesitated, unsure whether she was being mocked. Good. Let her wonder. She sat opposite Tendai, crossing her legs with graceful control. But Tendai noticed the tiny signs anyway. The extra tension in her shoulders, the way she checked the corners of the room before settling, the slight dryness around her mouth despite the gloss. Nalia was afraid. That made her more dangerous, but also easier to read. I'm glad she's safe, Nalia said. Tendai said nothing. A few seconds stretched. Then Nalia sighed, lowered her eyes, and performed regret. I know you hate me. Tendai almost smiled. Straight to emotion. Straight to the script where she was the tragic, misunderstood daughter trying to repair something broken. I don't hate you, Tendai said softly. That surprised Nalia more than anger would have. I don't, she asked with a sad little laugh. No. Tendai tilted her head. I understand you. That hit much harder. Nalia's expression tightened despite herself. Because hatred can be rejected. Understanding cannot. You think you do, Nalia said. I think you have always been terrified of becoming unnecessary. The silence that followed was the first honest thing in the room. Nalia's eyes hardened just slightly. You always did have a cruel imagination. Did I, Tendai asked? Or did I just spend years watching what happened every time Father's attention shifted away from you? Nalia looked away for a fraction of a second. Then she straightened. I didn't come here to fight. No, Tendai said. You came here because something has gone wrong. There it was again, that tiny flicker across Nalia's face. Not guilt. Calculation disrupted. Tendai leaned back in her chair and let the moment breathe. I know about the accounts, she said. Nalia's head snapped up. What accounts? The ones Father hoped would bury me? Tendai's voice remained calm. The ones you discovered before everyone else? Nalia laughed too quickly. I have no idea what you're talking about. Tendai studied her. No, she said gently. Then why were you more frightened than heartbroken when the Maseko arrangement collapsed? That landed. Hard. Nalia's fingers tightened around the stems of the lilies. You think you know everything because that man filled your head with stories. That man, Tendai repeated. Interesting choice. Not your husband, not the bodyguard. A beat. Nalia realized the mistake too late. Tendai continued before she could recover. You know who he is. Everyone knows who he is now. Nalia snapped. No, not now. Tendai's eyes sharpened. Before. Silence. The mask slipped for the first time. Nalia's mouth hardened. So what if I did? There. Truth ugly and sudden. Tendai kept her face still, though her pulse jumped. How long Nalia leaned back then, laughed under her breath this time, with open bitterness. Long enough to understand just how disgusting this all is. Disgusting. Yes. Nalia's voice sharpened. You... Of all people, you who were always trailing behind like some pitiful charity case, you end up attached to a man like that and suddenly the whole room changes around you. Ah, there it was. Not love, not betrayal, not even outrage over lies. Position. She was furious that Tendai had become important in a way she could not control. Tendai looked at her sister and felt strangely the first stirrings of grief beneath the anger. Nalia had been cruel for years, but cruelty that deep always fed on some rotten hunger. Their father had made daughters compete for oxygen and called it order. Still, damage explained is not damage excused. You wanted him, Tendai said quietly. Nalia's smile turned poisonous. I wanted what he represented. Power! Security! Nalia snapped. Then lower escape. That last word changed the room. Tendai went very still. Nalia realized she had said too much and immediately corrected with contempt. You wouldn't understand. Try me. Nalia looked toward the window, jaw tight. Father's losses are worse than you think. The Masekos were never just an engagement. Seku was leverage, cover, a bridge. She turned back sharply. And then somehow you married the one man rich enough to destroy all of it. Tendai's chest tightened. So that's why you're here, not for Gogo Ife. Don't be stupid. No, Tendai said. You're here because you need something. Nalia laughed once without humor. For someone who spent years acting helpless, you're suddenly very observant. Tendai ignored that. What do you need? Nalia's eyes met hers, and for the first time all morning there was no softness left in them, just naked urgency. Father is preparing to move everything, she said. If he falls, he will not fall alone. Tendai felt the warning before she understood it. What does that mean? It means your name is not the only one attached anymore. Nalia leaned in. He changed some of the structures after the wedding. Cold went through Tendai's blood. Changed them how Nalia held her gaze, then said the one thing Tendai had not yet imagined. He transferred part of the exposure through your marriage. The room seemed to shrink. Tendai stared. No. Yes, he can't. He already did. Tendai shot to her feet so fast the chair legs scraped sharply against the floor. Outside the door she heard movement guards reacting, ready. She didn't care. What exactly did he do? Nalia stood too, clutching the lilies like a prop she had forgotten to drop. I don't know all of it, I swear. But I heard him on the phone. He said if you became unreachable, then your husband's name would force negotiation instead of abandonment. Tendai's mind raced. Marriage, legal exposure, negotiation, not abandonment. Jabulani had not simply tried to bury her. He had adjusted the scheme after realizing whom she had married. Kabelo had become leverage, and Tendai had become the bridge between corruption and someone powerful enough to matter. The door opened. Kabelo stepped in, having clearly heard enough to stop pretending distance. His face was unreadable, which Tendai was beginning to understand was always his most dangerous expression. Nalia, he said evenly. You're done. She turned toward him, and for the first time, true fear crossed her face. Not because he was loud, because he was certain. But Tendai barely looked at her now. She was staring at Kabelo. He changed the structures after the wedding. Kabelo's silence lasted half a second too long. Which meant he had suspected. Maybe not all of it, but enough. Tendai's voice dropped sharp and shaking. You said I was a line. His eyes met hers. Now she understood the full horror of it. Her forced marriage had not only humiliated her, it had made her strategically valuable, and somewhere out there her father was already using that value like a weapon. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the clinic's air system. Tendai stood beside the chair she had just knocked back, her whole body tight with a new kind of fear. Not the helpless fear she had felt at the altar, not the old fear of Mirembe's voice or Jabulani's temper. This was colder, sharper, because it came with understanding. Her father had not simply used her as a scapegoat. He had adapted. He had seen her forced marriage to Kabelo not as a mistake, not as an inconvenience, but as a fresh route, a new channel, a better hostage structure. He had folded her into a larger game the moment he realized whom she had married, and now everyone in the room knew it. Nalia was the first to move. She set the bouquet down on the table with stiff fingers, as if only now remembering she was still holding it. "I told you what I know," she said quickly, her eyes shifting from Tendai to Kabelo and back again. "That's why I came." Kabelo did not raise his voice. He did not step toward her. He simply stood in the doorway, one hand in his pocket, the other resting at his side with unnerving stillness. "No," he said. "You came because the architecture is collapsing faster than your father promised." Nalia flinched. Tendai saw it. The choice of word. Architecture. Not family. Not business trouble. Architecture. A whole structure of lies, accounts, names, liabilities, alliances. Kabelo saw systems the way other people saw rooms. And now he was telling Nalia that system was breaking. "I'm trying to help," Nalia said. "No," Tendai said softly. Both of them looked at her. Tendai's voice stayed calm, but it carried something new now. A steadiness built out of pain finally sharpened into purpose. "You are trying to survive." Nalia's mouth hardened. "And you think you're not? I think I'm done pretending your panic is the same thing as conscience." That landed. For 1 second, the old sisterly dynamic tried to reform itself in the room, Nalia on one side, insult ready, Tendai on the other, expected to absorb it. But it failed, because Tendai was no longer standing where Nalia had left her. Nalia let out a bitter laugh. "You've changed quickly." Tendai looked at her. "No. I stopped making myself smaller so people like you could feel large." The words stunned even her a little. Because they were true, because she should have said them years ago. Nalia's face flushed. "You always talk like you're the only one who suffered in that house." "No," Tendai said. "I talk like I was the only one you were willing to sacrifice." Something cracked across Nalia's expression then. Not guilt exactly, but something close to being seen too clearly. She turned to Kabelo instead. Perhaps because confronting Tendai directly no longer felt safe. "You need to stop him," she said, too fast now. "Father has people moving records already. By tonight he'll say everything was done to protect Tendai from emotional instability after the wedding. He'll claim she signed what she didn't understand. He'll say your marriage made her erratic. Secretive, compromised." "Enough," Kabelo said. "Just that. One word." And Nalia stopped. Tendai felt it again, that strange force in the room whenever he chose to use his voice like that. Not volume. Authority. The kind that came from being obeyed for a very long time. Kabelo stepped fully inside, then closed the door behind him. "Nalia," he said, "I'm going to ask you 3 questions. You will answer them carefully." She tried to gather herself. "Or what?" He looked at her without expression. "Or I let the first formal version of this story reach the Masakos before your side is documented." The color drained from her face. Tendai understood enough now to know what that meant. If the Masekos or Seku's family received a legal, structured briefing before Nalia could reposition herself, her engagement would not merely collapse. It would become radioactive. No other alliance family would touch her without demanding more records, more scrutiny, more humiliation. For someone like Nalia, social death was its own form of terror. Kabelo continued. When did Jabulani first discuss post-marriage transfers? Nalia hesitated. I don't know exact dates. That was not the question. She swallowed. The night before the wedding. Tendai's stomach tightened. Of course, even before the ceremony, Jabulani had already begun converting her forced marriage into an instrument. Kabelo did not react outwardly, with whom I only heard part of the call, with whom Nalia's eyes flicked away. A man named Dlambo. Kabelo's face changed slightly. It was a tiny shift. But Tendai saw it. That name mattered. What is it? She asked. Kabelo did not look at her yet. Dlambo sits near a procurement oversight channel. He should not be anywhere near private fallback structures unless the corruption link is broader than we confirmed. Tendai felt a chill. Broader. So this was bigger still. Kabelo asked the next question. What did Jabulani say about my name? Nalia licked suddenly dry lips. That once the marriage was legal, you could not afford to ignore exposure tied through her, that your people would want quiet before scandal. Tendai's jaw tightened. So that was it. Her father had assumed power always preferred silence. He thought Kabelo would negotiate to avoid public damage. He thought Tendai's marriage would force leverage through respectability. He did not understand that the man he had underestimated was not ruled by embarrassment. He was ruled by control. And control once threatened could become ruthless. Kabelo asked the third question. What do you want in exchange for this conversation? Nalia looked offended. I told you I came to help. No, Tendai said. Nalia turned sharply toward her. Tendai took one slow step forward. You didn't come here to save me. You came here because father no longer guarantees your safety. The Masakos are pulling away. Seku is probably not returning your calls. Mother is likely blaming the house staff. And for the first time in your life you have realized father might actually let you drown if it keeps him standing another week. Silence. Nalia's eyes filled not with softness but fury. You think you know everything? Tendai's voice stayed almost gentle. No. I think I finally know enough. Nalia looked from Tendai to Kabelo, calculating rapidly, trying to decide whether pride or survival should speak next. Survival won. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. I want my name out of the records. There it was. Finally. Honest selfishness. Kabelo nodded once as if he had expected nothing else. Impossible. Nalia recoiled. Then why am I even here? Because there is a difference, he said, between being in contaminated records and being documented as cooperating before containment. She stared at him. Tendai almost did too. The language was so clinical it bordered on brutal. But she understood the meaning. Kabelo was offering nothing sentimental, only structure, damage hierarchy, the chance to be less destroyed than the others if she chose the right side fast enough. Nalia understood it too. You would protect me? She asked carefully. Kabelo's face remained expressionless. I would document your cooperation accurately, which meant no promises, no affection, no rescue, only facts. Tendai saw something in Nalia's eyes than she had rarely seen before. Not vanity, not cruelty, loneliness. The ugly, starving loneliness of a daughter who had spent years being adored conditionally and had only now realized how conditional it truly was. For one unstable second, Tendai almost pitied her. Then she remembered the wedding, remembered the laughter, remembered Nalia smiling while Jabulani threatened Gogo Ife's life. Pity did not erase accountability. What else? Tendai asked. Nalia looked at her warily. What? What else did father move after the wedding? I don't know everything. What do you know? Nalia hesitated, then answered in a lower voice. He ordered one old file brought out of storage. Tendai went very still. What file? Nalia looked directly at her. Your mother's. The room tilted. Tendai felt the blood leave her face. My mother's file. Yes. What was in it, I don't know. I swear. Nalia's voice shook now, and for the first time it sounded real. But he was angry. Not nervous angry. He kept saying it should have been destroyed years ago. Kabelo was already reaching for his phone. Tendai barely heard him when he spoke to someone on the line. Seal every archive property tied to Dube Holdings, physical and digital. Start with legacy storage. His voice had gone cold enough to cut glass. And move now. He ended the call and turned back to Tendai. There may be proof in that file, he said, of what was buried, of what was shifted away from you. Tendai's throat closed. So Gogo Ife had been right. Her mother had left something powerful enough that Jabulani feared it even now. Nalia backed toward the door, suddenly sensing the center of gravity shifting away from her. I told you what I know. Kabelo stepped aside without looking at her. You'll remain available. It was not a request. Nalia glanced at Tendai one last time. The hatred was still there, but something else had joined it now. Envy stripped of fantasy, fear stripped of cosmetics, and maybe buried very deep the first ruined understanding that she had never been safe either. She opened the door, then paused. When this breaks, she said without turning around, don't think father will come after you with papers first. Tendai's heart thudded once. Nalia looked over her shoulder. He'll come after you with shame. Then she left. The door closed softly behind her. Tendai stood very still. Kabelo's phone was already in his hand again. Messages arriving too fast to read from a distance. What happens now? She asked. He looked up. For the first time since Nalia arrived, there was no distance left in his face. No controlled mask, just decision. Now he said we stop waiting for your father to write the story first. Tendai swallowed. How Kabelo held her gaze. Tonight, he said, Nalia and Seku's engagement party becomes the place where your family loses control. And suddenly Tendai understood. This would not end in private paperwork. It would end where her humiliation began, in public. By sunset, the city had begun to buzz. The engagement party of Nalia Dube and Seku Maseko had been meant to repair everything. That was how Jabulani designed public events, not as celebrations, but as cosmetic surgery for rotting truths. If enough light hit the chandeliers, if enough champagne moved through the room, if enough influential people posted smiling photographs, then perhaps the cracks in the foundation would look like decoration. But that night, the Dube mansion no longer belonged to him. Not completely. Tendai stood in front of the mirror in the private suite of Kabelo's residence, while Lorato fastened the final clasp at the back of her dress. It was not a bridal gown, not a costume of humiliation. Just a clean, elegant, deep green dress that fit her body without trying to turn her into something else. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel dressed by other people's intentions. She felt prepared. Lorato stepped back and smiled softly. You look like yourself. The words hit Tendai more deeply than praise ever could. Thank you. On the bed beside her sat a folder thinner than the one from the clinic, but far more dangerous. Certified copies, transfer instructions, internal account maps, archived correspondence, a flagged inventory list showing one legacy file pulled from Dube storage that afternoon, then intercepted before destruction. And beneath it all, the oldest wound of all proof that Tendai's mother had indeed left a protected asset structure and guardianship instructions that Jabulani had buried after her death. Not a myth. Not a sentimental story told by Gogo Ife to comfort a child. A real theft. A real betrayal. A whole life quietly bent around a stolen truth. There was a knock at the open door. Tendai looked up. Kabelo stood there in a black evening suit, clean-lined and severe-looking, less like a businessman tonight than a verdict made human. No bodyguard disguise remained, no lowered posture, no borrowed invisibility. The room itself seemed to recognize him differently now. Lorato left at once, giving them privacy. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Kabelo's gaze moved over her face, searching not for beauty, but for readiness. "Are you certain?" Tendai almost smiled. "You're asking very late. I would ask at every hour if it gave you another honest choice." That answer sat between them quietly. He had learned something. Maybe not enough to undo the damage. Nothing could do that. But enough to stop confusing protection with control. Tendai picked up the folder. "No one is forcing me tonight." His eyes held hers. Good. They drove to the Doob mansion under a darkening sky. The city lights glowed gold across the wet roads, and the convoy moved without announcement. No sirens, no drama, just precision. As they approached the gates, Tendai saw the familiar facade of the house where she had been made small for so many years. White stone, tall windows, imported lights, beauty stretched over rot. But tonight, she did not feel like the girl who used to disappear in those rooms. The gates opened. The party was already alive. Music spilled across the garden terrace. Waiters moved with trays of crystal glasses. Men in dark suits and women in shining gowns laughed beneath string lights and floral installations, arranged to look effortless and cost a fortune. Somewhere near the fountain, cameras flashed as guests posed beside a gold backdrop carrying Nalia and Seku's names. A lie in flowers. The moment Tendai stepped out of the car, heads turned, first in surprise, then in confusion, then in shock, as Kabelo emerged beside her, unmistakable, now in status and presence, no longer the poor bodyguard the family had once mocked. A ripple moved through the crowd before anyone even spoke. Powerful people recognized power faster than gossip ever could. At the top of the terrace steps, Mirembe saw them first. The color left her face. Jabulani turned next. And in that instant, Tendai watched something she had never seen before. Fear, not anger, not disdain. Fear. It was small, quick, but real. Then Jabulani smiled and started down the steps as if nothing were wrong. "Tendai," he said warmly, too warmly. "We didn't expect you tonight." "Of course you didn't," she replied. His eyes flicked to Kabelo, and the warmth in them cooled by a degree. "Mr. Afolayan." A surprise. Kabelo's expression did not move, only to those who were not paying attention. Jabulani let out a light laugh meant for nearby guests, but nobody around them laughed with him. Too many people were already sensing currents beneath the surface. "Whatever misunderstandings there have been," Jabulani said, "this is not the evening for unpleasantness." Tendai looked at him for a long second, then said clearly enough for the nearest cluster of guests to hear, "Actually, Father, I think this is exactly the evening for truth." Silence spread faster than music. Across the terrace, Nalia had gone still beside Seku. Her hand remained looped around his arm, but the engagement smile had vanished from her face. Seku looked from Tendai to Kabelo to Jabulani, with the stunned focus of a man realizing he had walked into a room without knowing its real purpose. Jabulani's voice lowered. "Do not do this." For the first time in her life, Tendai did not flinch when he tried to command her in public. Instead, she stepped past him and moved toward the center of the terrace. The music faltered, then stopped. Every eye followed her. Tendai turned slowly, taking in the faces around her. Some guests knew nothing. Some knew fragments. Some she suspected knew enough to leave quickly if this turned legal. But all of them had once watched her move through this house as if she were made of lesser material. "Not tonight. I was forced to marry in this family's home yesterday," she said. Her voice rang clear across the terrace. Many of you were present. Many of you laughed. Nobody moved. I was told it was punishment. A lesson. A way to put me in my place. Her gaze found Jabulani's. But that was not the truth. The truth was far uglier. Jabulani stepped forward. Tendai, you are emotional. We can discuss this privately. No, she said. Private is where you bury things. A murmur moved through the crowd. She opened the folder. My father has been moving money through fraudulent structures tied to shell vendors and redirected accounts. When those structures began collapsing, he prepared fallback liability using my name. She lifted one page. My name. Without my knowledge. Mirembe made a shocked sound for the crowd's benefit. That is absurd. Tendai did not even look at her, and when his position worsened, he adjusted the structures after my forced marriage, intending to use the legal connection to my husband as leverage. Now the murmur turned into real unrest. Seku pulled his arm gently but firmly from Nalia's grip. Jabulani's composure cracked. Enough. But Tendai kept going. My mother left legal assets and protective instructions for me before she died. Those records were hidden, altered, buried. She held up the certified documentation. This family did not raise me out of mercy. They stripped me of what was mine, used me to absorb blame, and called me ungrateful for surviving it. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. Then Kabelo stepped forward not to take over, but to stand where his presence made denial harder. I can confirm the records are authentic, he said. Preservation orders have already been filed. Relevant parties will be contacted tonight. That did it. Everything changed at once. Guests began whispering openly. A few stepped away to take calls. One older investor turned and walked out without even pretending courtesy. Seku stared at Nalia as if seeing her for the first time. Tell me this isn't true, he said. Nalia's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Jabulani snapped. Do not speak to my daughter that way. Seku turned on him. Which daughter? The question hit the terrace like a slap. Nalia's face crumpled not into innocence this time, but into panic. Seku, listen to me. No, he said. You listen. Was I part of an alliance or part of a cover-up? She reached for him. He stepped back. Mirembe, seeing the room slipping away, made one final desperate move. She pointed at Tendai. She always wanted this. She was jealous of Nalia for years. Stop, came a frail voice from the entrance. Everyone turned. Gogo Ife stood there in a wheelchair, wrapped in a dark shawl, one clinic nurse behind her and another at her side. She looked weak, but her eyes were blazing. Jabulani went white. The old woman lifted one trembling hand and pointed directly at him. You stole from the dead, she said, and fed on the living. No one breathed. Then she turned to Tendai. And you? She said, her voice gentling through the strain. You were never the shame of this family. You were the proof that God still leaves one honest heart in a burning house. Tendai broke, not into weakness, into release. Tears came fast and hot, but this time she did not hide them. She walked to her grandmother, dropped to her knees beside the chair, and held her hand in both of hers. Around them the house of lies finally cracked in public. Seku removed his engagement ring and placed it on a tray abandoned by a passing waiter. Nalia stared at it as if her future had just become visible in metal. Jabulani looked at Kabelo, then rage shaking beneath his skin. You planned this. Kabelo's expression remained cold. No, he said. You did. That was the end of it. Not legally. Not fully. There would be investigations, filings, statements, consequences. But morally, publicly, symbolically, that was the end. The night her father meant to restore control became the night he lost it. And Tendai, who had once been dragged to an altar as a sacrifice, rose from the wreckage, not because a powerful man saved her, but because truth finally stood where fear used to. Later, long after the guests scattered and the cameras died, and Jabulani's voice no longer mattered, Tendai stood alone with Kabelo under the quiet lights of the empty garden. The night air was cool. For once, neither of them needed armor. "I meant what I said at the clinic," he told her. "I do not expect what happened between us to be repaired by explanation." Tendai looked at him. He had power, more than she had ever wanted near her life. But now she also saw something else: restraint. A man learning painfully and imperfectly that love without truth becomes another cage. "I know," she said. "And I meant what I said this morning, too," he continued. "This stopped being part of an investigation because of you." She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question that mattered now, not about money, not about the disguise, not about the ruined wedding. "If I walk toward you from here," she said, "will there be any more hidden rooms?" He answered without hesitation. "No. No more tests, no. No more decisions made for me in the name of protection." His gaze did not leave hers. "No." Tendai let the silence sit. Let it breathe. Let it prove itself. Then very gently she placed the old wedding ring, the one from the forced ceremony, into his palm. "For a long time," she said, "this felt like proof that my life could be stolen." His fingers closed around it. She stepped closer. "But maybe one day, if we are honest enough, it can become proof that stolen things do not have to stay stolen forever." Kabelo looked at her as though she had handed him something more fragile than forgiveness, and more valuable than victory. Hope, not blind hope. Earned hope. He did not reach for her first. That mattered. So Tendai reached for him. And this time, when she chose him, no one forced her hand. After everything, the deepest wound was never poverty scandal or even betrayal. It was the slow destruction of a person's sense of worth. Tendai had been taught that love must be earned through silence, sacrifice, and pain. She had been told that survival meant shrinking. But the truth was the opposite. Real love does not ask a person to disappear, so others can feel powerful. Real family does not survive by choosing one child to bleed for the rest. And real healing begins the moment someone stops calling cruelty duty and names it for what it is. Kabelo's journey was different, but no less necessary. Power had taught him to measure risk control outcomes and trust evidence over emotion. Yet even he had to learn that protecting someone without truth is only a softer kind of domination. In the end, both of them changed. Tendai reclaimed her voice. Kabelo learned to lower his armor. And justice arrived not as revenge, but as exposure. The lie lost its shelter. The truth stood in the open. And from that painful place, something honest could finally begin. If this story moved, you tell me in the comments. Do you think blood makes a family, or does truth? And where are you watching from today? Drop your country and local time too. If you love emotional stories with powerful twists, hard-earned justice and healing endings, subscribe and stay with me for the next one.